On our program, we have attempted to create a forum for dialogue about complex education issues that matter to students, parents, educators, and other education stakeholders. Funding education is a very real consideration, as well as an extraordinarily complex one. Case in point, through the K-12 funding allocation system, the provincial government allocates funds each year to the boards of education in BC, primarily to operate schools, manage district services, and for special programs. What happens when needs continue to evolve and increase at a pace more rapid than the availability of resources? How and in what way do these administrative challenges require innovative solutions by boards of education to support teacher development and other agendas? On the program today to discuss this challenge in their school district are Patti Bacchus, Chairperson, and Mike Lombardi, Trustee, both from the Vancouver Board of Education. I'm Paul Shaker, and this is an Education Matter. Our first topic today is funding education in BC. One of the contemporary issues that we hear most about is the funding of the school boards and a constant debate over whether the government is funding them adequately or not. And every stakeholder group, including the ministry, has an opinion on this matter. We've had you both on the program today to help us understand what the issues are in funding our BC schools. Mike, would you like to start off the discussion in trying to clarify this debate for us?
Sure, I'll kick it off and Patty can add in. As you know, one of the things the Ministry of Education always does is talks about how much we're putting in the greatest amount of money ever into public education. And while we are increasing the amount of money that goes into public education, the Ministry does not fund what our requirements are. For example, the Ministry negotiates a salary settlement with teachers, and instead of funding the full thing, they only fund parts of it. So what we get every year is we get this increased amount of money, but they fail to fund things like the salary increments, the benefit costs, and the inflationary costs on goods and services. So while they do increase the funding, it does not cover the costs. So what boards have to do is we have to continually reduce funds. And in a district like Vancouver with over 55,000 students, we've had to cut $45 million over the last 6 years, and this year, once again, we're faced with the challenge of having to cut another $7 million. So while the money's going up, it's not funding us adequately. They're underfunding us, and it's a systematic shortfall.
Patty, is there something you'd like to add to that element of the discussion?
Well, and it is true that there are more dollars than ever, but when you look in terms of inflation and the cost that we have, it simply hasn't kept up. And even as a proportion of the provincial budget, the proportion that was previously allocated to education has decreased in relation to other areas. So in real spending power, I mean, most things have gone up over time, most expenses in many areas, as we're all aware in our own lives and our own budgets. So more money coming in doesn't necessarily mean more spending power over a period of time. And that's really our struggle, because our costs, just to do the same thing from one year to the next, the cost of doing that increases out of proportion to the funding that we get additionally from the province. So we're just, that gap gets wider and wider as the years go by.
Well, this sounds familiar to me because at the university we had a similar problem. Salary increases were not necessarily totally funded. Certainly the step changes were not funded. And also inflation and things like the cost of utilities were not funded. And so we were in a constant squeeze de facto. Although the funding by some measures was going up, there was a squeeze because it didn't keep up with the expense ratio. Are there certain things that, separate from this debate, are going up in British Columbia education through the eyes of the school board? There's certain particular expenses, like servicing special needs, for example, that are rising faster than inflation.
That's a really critical area for us. Our overall enrollment has declined slightly, a small percentage, but our actual enrollment in terms of real numbers and as a percentage of our students who have been identified with having special needs is increasing. And the supplementary funding, we do get supplementary funding. So for example, a student who has a ministry designation of autism spectrum, for example, would get an additional $16,000 that would come to the district that we could apply to some support for that. But we spend at least double that. The cost of doing so, $16,000 wouldn't even pay for the half of a support worker, much less the support from a school psychologist, therapists, speech-language pathology, OT, resource teachers, the many kinds of services these students may require to successfully access education. So that gap is getting wider for us by the years as our proportion of those students grows in relation to our overall enrollment. That's having a real impact on us and our ability to do that and provide the support that those students need in order to be successful.
Are there any other fields that you notice, Mike, that you think are going up faster than the inflation rate?
Well, the other thing that I think for us in Vancouver is, it's one of the most diverse school districts in the province, and the range of challenges and needs we've got is significant. And another good example for us is our Aboriginal education, and we're really working hard to get the success rates up for our educational Aboriginal kids, and there's some real challenges there, and we need to put in additional resources to what we're given in order to help meet their needs.
The last time I looked, I saw figures on New York City where the average special education student was requiring 4 times the funding of a so-called regular student, and that was lumping all the special education students together. It's really quite a dramatic ratio in order to serve these students at the level of need that they demonstrate. ESL is something you haven't explicitly mentioned. Is that another area that requires special investment?
It does, and as the funding does provide some supplementary funding to students who have English as their second language, and that is a pretty significant area in Vancouver, as you may be aware. Supporting the needs of those students is a tremendous challenge. Also working with families, and we don't have the kinds of resources we used to have to be able to engage families and parents. We know that students succeed when parents are involved or have a higher likelihood of being successful. The ability to have family support workers reach out, the kinds of counseling opportunities as well. So that is, in Vancouver, a significant proportion of our students and our families do not have English as their first language.
Let's back up a little bit again with you, Mike, and say, with these groups that we've been talking about, special education, ESL, Aboriginal learners, Patty mentioned some of the specific ways that money would be spent. Could you add to drawing a picture for us of, if the money were available, how it would be spent to serve such populations?
Sure. Well, we can go back to the year 2000 when all of a sudden the government significantly cut back funding in education. At that time, we had a formula for allocating ESL teachers, teacher librarians, special education teachers, learning assistance teachers. That all got wiped out in one blow. And as a result of that, school districts like Vancouver have had to scramble to try to put together some support systems for those kids. And I think all of us would agree that the systems we've been put in place, we've been trying to do what we can, but with the resources we've got, we just haven't been able to do the job that we'd like to do to meet the needs of kids. So we need to have a significant infusion of resources to provide support to our most vulnerable kids.
I know that some parents feel they need to move their child into a private school setting in order to get special needs met. Do you think that's one of the reasons why you've seen an increase in the rate of attendance of private schools by Vancouver children?
I think there are a significant number of families who have become frustrated or concerned about the lack of support for their students with special needs, and we've seen some new schools opening in the Vancouver area that specifically support those students and offer programming. They are very expensive, so it's a difficult option. It's not available, obviously, to many families. But the overall trend toward private education, there is more funding than ever also public money going into private schools, and there is more ease now of taking that supplementary funding for special ed with the child. So it does provide a bit of a financial incentive and certainly a business opportunity for the people who provide that. And it's a constant challenge for us because we do a very, very good job in our public schools. Compared to the rest of the world and the value for money, we know we're doing an effective job, but we're not doing it for every student. So we're constantly playing that. We want to, we want the public to have confidence. We want families to choose public education. We think it is the best choice. But in some cases, we are not meeting the needs of every child who comes to us, and particularly in the category of learning disabilities. We have many children with learning disabilities, and we no longer receive supplementary funding to address their needs. So it has to come from somewhere, and it's very difficult to provide the level of support that many of our students require within the resources that we have.
Mike, would you talk a little bit about this migration to private schools and how it's related to the funding issue?
Yeah. Well, as you know, our enrollment drives the amount of money we get from the government. So anytime you lose enrollment, your amount of funding is reduced. And One of the things we've obviously noticed in Vancouver, and I think some of the surrounding areas, is over the last few years there has been a trickle away from the public school system, and of course that's reduced the resources we have. Although I think we're starting to see a bit of a shift right now, as you know, with the economic meltdown worldwide. It's having some impact on families, and we're starting to already see two things. One is the number of international students coming our ways being reduced because of economic realities, and some parents who had been sending their kids to private schools will no longer have the means to do that, so that's affecting that too. So, but I think in terms of the quality of the program, when you look at what we have to offer, the diversity that we deal with, our schools can go head to head with any private school in the system.
Patty, one of the things that seems to be true but not obvious necessarily is in the system we have, not only in Vancouver but probably around BC, sometimes if your child has a special need, they might be served in a neighboring public school better than the one in whose catchment you live. I don't know if that's obvious to people, but that, from my experience in talking with parents, it seems that sometimes they move their child a little bit within the district and they find the services they need.
There's variability in terms of service, and often that's at the advice of school district staff or staff in the schools. They'll know that there is some specific programming available. We don't have everything for every student in every school, although we would like to. We do really encourage inclusion in as much as possible in regular programming with outside support where it is needed. However, we do have district programs in various schools. Some schools provide a broader range, and we have, for example, an autism resource center in one of our secondary schools that provides students that have fairly high functioning with autism the ability to be integrated but have a resource center they can go back to for extra support, and that's quite popular and successful, but it's not something that would necessarily work in every one of our high schools, nor may there be the demand for it. So there is some variability for sure.
Mike, could you talk a little bit about, give us some kind of quantitative scale of what the shortfall is as you perceive it, so that the public don't think we're, talking about doubling the school budget or something. About, what is the margin that, from your point of view, we're short in our funding as a percentage, for example?
Yeah. Well, for example, our budget's about $485 million for the Vancouver School District, and we're having to cut $7.12 million out for this current year. So obviously that would help us do, at least keep going with what we have at this point in time. But as I mentioned to you, over the past 6 years, we've had to cut back $45 million out of that budget. So it's substantial, and it's really taken away our ability to meet the needs of all kids. And I think what we need to do is get our parents and our partner groups to join us in advocating for the kind of funding we need to make education an investment it should be. I mean, there's a lot of conversation these days about infrastructure projects. I can't think of a better thing than a social infrastructure project such as education. In the end, if we want to deal with some of the challenges like poverty, youth, and gangs, the place to invest is in early education, early childhood education. So I think we should be making the case for additional resources to education so we can prevent some of the, the challenges we're facing right now in our communities.
But I think it's important when we talk about the amount of funding we need, we're not talking really large numbers in the context of the larger economy and the larger provincial budget. We are taking up a smaller portion of the GDP, a smaller portion of the provincial budget. It's not the situation we see in healthcare where, the sky's the limit in terms of costs. We're quite sustainable economically, in relation to what we do and our outcomes. And I think we get very good value for our money. Again, compared with other jurisdictions, and you look to the U.S. in some cases and what they'll spend and what's coming out, we do very well. Our teachers, we know, are incredibly effective, and our schools are very effective in the work that they do, particularly given the resources that they have. But if we had that really relatively small amount extra to make up that gap, we felt that squeeze year after year, we could do so much more. It would be an incredible investment.
Thank you very much. We'll return in a moment with Patti Bacchus and Mike Lombardi.
For more than 40 years, the Faculty of Education at SFU has been delivering academic programs that are innovative and responsive. Based on the academic research of our professors and the expertise of practicing teachers from your communities, our programs are designed to meet classroom needs. As a community, we're piecing together a successful education experience for students today and in the future.
Welcome back to our discussion about challenges and solutions for funding education in BC. Patty, I think we'd like to hear a little bit about the funding formula and how it works well and how it doesn't work so well, because that's right at the heart of how education is funded in BC.
Yeah, and when we hear the education minister talk about more money than ever, but we have fewer students, it makes sense. Why would you need to be spending more when you have fewer students in your schools? And we do have some slight enrollment decline. That's a temporary trend, is our understanding. So for example, in Vancouver, if we have 500 fewer students this year than we did the previous year, that's about $3 million in funding that won't come because the Ministry of Education funds school districts based on per student. So every student who walks through the door brings with them, about $5,800 in funding and possibly some supplemental funding. So when we lose students, we lose that total package per student. We can't make up all of those savings because so many of our costs are really fixed costs. So for example, 500 students over our 109 schools might be 5 from one school, 3 from another, 8 from another, spread over 5 or 8 grades perhaps. So we still have to heat the school, staff it. There may be some reduction in teaching overall, but not significant enough to make up that money. So we get hit really hard. On the other side, if enrollment goes up, it's a bit of a bonus, but we're really impacted by those fluctuations in enrollment right now. And we need more stability because it makes it very difficult because, families moved, things change in our demographics, and it's often hard to predict, and we have to make those adjustments. Mm-hmm. And they're certainly not proportionate to the funding formula and the way it works in terms of the reality of actually carrying it out in the schools.
Is this your experience of the funding formula?
Yeah, totally, Paul. I mean, basically what we're seeing is, 500 enrollment decline this time, and yet we're not going to be able to get any kind of funding which is going to allow us to proportionally continue to meet the needs of the kids left in the system because of the funding formula.
At the university, they normally fund in a band, and you don't get a cut if your decline, and you don't get an increase if your increase is within this 2% or so. So they put a buffer and a lag. Because of this reason you're giving, you can't suddenly shut down schools and classrooms. But if you see a trend, you have time to adjust. But you're saying that's not the way it works.
They do have some protection built in if you have a bigger, if it gets over a certain percentage change, there is some relief through a grant, but it doesn't sort of help us year to year unless you have a big chunk. And that protects some of this, particularly the smaller districts where they could have a real hit one year that would really affect them. But we just find it kind of grinds us down year to year. It's not big enough in Vancouver that we trigger any relief, but it certainly affects our ability to support students.
This makes it all the more important where you put your priorities. So I'd like for you to talk a little bit about the new board's development of priorities and what they're putting near the top of the list in the forthcoming months.
Well, we'll kick it off. I mean, I think we're driven by the notion that our goal is to provide success for all kids and allow them to realize their potential so they can become full functioning members of our democratic society. So that's what our goal is. So what we're trying to do is focus all of our resources and our energy on teaching and learning at the classroom level and the supports that are required there. So what we're doing is, as we go through the budgeting process in our conversations, is always bringing it back to, so how is this going to help us improve success for every student? And taking a thorough look at our programs and our services to make sure that that's the case. And another key factor, I think, in that is making sure that a city like Vancouver has equity and access. I mean, we've got kids on the east side of Vancouver, downtown east side to the west side of Vancouver, and making sure that we have a diversity of programs so that kids can get equity and access to programs regardless of where they live, and that's one of the challenges. And we're looking at ways and means of making sure that kids don't have to go outside of their neighborhoods in order to get the kind of quality programs and services that kids can get anywhere in the city. So we're taking a really serious look at that, and we're really encouraged by that because we think there's a real value in having kids attend their neighborhood schools, if that's their choice. And so that's a big focus for us right now.
Patty, priorities?
Well, certainly, Mike, I would share what Mike has just said. I mean, we've also made a commitment to be public defenders of education and champions of education and help build public support so we can continue to do the work that we're doing over the long term. We think right now there's an important need for that. There's a lot of misunderstandings, and build the public support, build the political support for really investing in education so we have the resources we can do. We have the people, and they know how to do it. I mean, we have amazing things happening in our schools. I'm constantly, when I go out to schools, amazed at the innovation, the creativity, and the ways in which teaching staffs have come together to make things successful despite the very challenging economic environment they're working in. And we like to look at what's working well. There's different programs that are doing different things in different communities, and as Mike has referred to, we have very diverse range of students in Vancouver. So what is working well in one community may not be appropriate in another, but we need to learn from that. And certainly, you know, an area of focus for us is increasing the graduation rates, particularly for Aboriginal students. They're very disappointing right now. It's about 50%, and we absolutely have to improve that. We know there is a bit of a baby boom going on in our Aboriginal community in Vancouver, and we have a whole cohort of students that are going to be coming through our schools, and I want to be able to go in there and look at a group of those students and know that it won't be a case that half of them don't make it to graduation, because that's just not good enough. We need to ensure that we're meeting the needs of our students with special needs, and we're having to take a really good look at how we can do that over time in a way that's going to be effective.
I hear you alluding to something that perhaps we should make explicit when you're talking about the role of the public schools in our democratic society. I think that the notion of the public school as a public good existing for the benefit of children and the community and provided by society in the most forthcoming way is something that doesn't get expressed explicitly enough. I think that that's behind some of the things that you're saying. You want to make this contribution to society and to the youth of the community.
Absolutely. I mean, public education, it is the foundation of democratic society and a just society and a fair society where people can be engaged and people can be part of, you know, be treated fairly and have equal opportunities to succeed. If we don't have that investment up front, we're going to see the consequences down the road. And I think we have a public education system we can be very proud of, but I think it is being eroded constantly by the kinds of funding pressures that we see.
Well, one of the things I noticed in Canada that's much to its credit over my experience in the U.S. is children of various social classes and other discriminations are pushed together into school catchments, and so school populations are not stratified by class and ethnicity and so on, but they're mixed. That's one of the precious things that I think you've obtained in Vancouver to this point that you want to hang on to.
Yeah, we're very proud of the diversity. It's really just a given now. You know, I have my own children. I mean, it's a completely accepted. It's just part of the fabric of how because they've come through the public school system. They're familiar. I mean, the experience, the richness of the learning, they're colorblind. They're respectful and aware of other cultures and values. But as far as working together and just complete acceptance, I mean, it's really wonderful to see. And of course, that is the preparation they're going to be needing for the kind of world that they're going to be inheriting and the kinds of challenges we're leaving them. And when we talk about investment in education, we're in a situation now in deficit spending in this province. Who's going to pay that deficit off? Who gets it? Our children are going to get it. We can't shortchange them on the education side and then leave them with a deficit, and they won't have the skills and abilities to find a way out of that. We've got to give them what they need, and it's an increasingly complex world. As we all know, you have to have an education now to thrive in this world. You cannot get by with a strong back and a shovel anymore. We need to give them the tools.
Or a chainsaw. Mike, Patty was alluding to some of the success stories in Vancouver schools, and I'd like to give you a chance, both of you, to enumerate a few of these stories because people need to know about some of the innovations that are taking place.
Absolutely. I think one of the big strengths of our high school system is, and we have 18 high schools in Vancouver, we've developed a mini school program in our school, so almost every one of our high schools has got a mini school which focuses on something of a particular focus. For example, King George has got a technology focus. The school where my kids go has got a focus on outdoor education. There's an academic focus at Point Grey. There's an industrial commercial arts focus at Vancouver Tech. And so what we have is smaller schools within schools where kids focus on these particular program emphases. And so it's a great opportunity for kids to come together, have a curriculum and courses designed around a particular interest area of theirs and pursue that. And we've had tremendous success, and most of the schools, I would say probably 60% of the population comes from the catchment area, and the rest come from students from around the city. So that's been a really big strength in our secondary schools. And then I think I look at our programs such as our French immersion programs, which are doing very, very well. We're talking about the idea of an immersion Mandarin program in the next coming year, our Montessori program. So the diversity and range of programs available in our community is fantastic. And I think our goal is, again, to make sure that we've got that broad range and have it available in all of our neighborhoods, so that, you know, a neighborhood actually does provide the continuum of programs and services to meet the needs of kids and communities. So I think it's, when you go into our schools and step in and start to see what's going on, it's fantastic. And one of our challenges, and I think Patty referred to it, is part of our job is advocacy and communications, because I think we don't do enough of selling of what we're doing in our schools, because I think when people walk in and experience it, they are very impressed.
Yes, I think that is a characteristic problem. It's one of the reasons we have this program, to give educators and the other stakeholders like yourselves an opportunity to tell us the real story as you see it at the ground level, right from inside the schools, about the successes and the challenges of our public schools. Thank you both for appearing on the program. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. Local school boards are a treasured part of North America's historical design for delivering public education. Our founding principles have inclined us to create a school system that is grounded in neighborhoods and communities and grows from such local and personal roots. Some in government and the policy community are convinced that more central control would benefit public education. In order to achieve their goals, school boards would lose authority or disappear altogether. The assembly line notion that larger scale and centralized command and control fit all of society's institutions is a mistake. The opposite is true. When we can manage institutions close to the community, we should do so. Let us keep human scale in our school governance and support our boards of education. Our school trustees are key stakeholders in BC education. Thank you for watching Your Education Matters.
For more information about this show or to view past episodes, go to the Your Education Matters website at www.youreducationmatters.ca. The views and opinions presented in this program are not necessarily those of all faculties, staff, or administration at SFU.